Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me here. Well, things have certainly been intense, haven't they? Just about everyone I know has been going through profound changes in their personal lives and experiencing a great deal of stress on and off in one way or another. And of course, what's been happening out in the world hasn't been helping either. This dimensional shift that we're going through on the way to the fifth dimension is probably taking most of us at least somewhat by surprise. I've been talking and writing about the shift for a number of years now, knowing how huge a leap in consciousness we'd all have to be taking during these years and how difficult that was probably going to be. But even I am realizing how different it is to just intellectually understand the concept of an evolutionary leap of consciousness compared to what it actually is when you experience it. So here we are in it. Here we are at the point when the quantum leap into 5D has really begun. And any kind of flowery or spiritually romantic images we may have formerly had of what this leap might be like are now being shattered. We're seeing that this kind of leap is taking a whole lot of continuing hard work, sometimes to simply just keep going, and that it's demanding that we stretch and stretch our sense of trust and spiritual understanding to keep it all positive about what we're experiencing and what we're seeing occurring in the world. And although it may feel as if we're finally at kind of a lull of some sort in the world, it still looks as if we're in for a period that is maybe even more bumpy and rough than it already has been. As humanity as a whole, and each of us as individuals, proceed to clear out all the remaining third dimensional debris that we've picked up during our sojourn through the third dimension on planet Earth. And for a lot of us, it's been many thousands of years that we've been working at this. So it's no wonder so many light workers are feeling bone weary at this point. But the important thing to remember during this whole period ahead of us now, if you do start feeling discouraged, confused, or frightened by what's happening, do not fear. The earth and all souls who are planning to make the shift into the fifth dimension are still very firmly on a positive timeline in getting there. It just may not look or feel like it at this point. Remember that what we're experiencing now are the transitional times that prophecies have foretold for many thousands of years as humanity makes the enormous leap from the third dimension into the fifth dimension. These transitional times have always been described as chaotic, tumultuous, and disruptive because of how immense an evolutionary leap of consciousness this was going to be for humanity. It can be helpful to understand that what it is that is actually the primal cause of all the chaos at this point. To some extent, it has to do with the powerful astrological changes that occurred this last year. But even more importantly, it has to do with increasingly powerful, high frequency waves of light that have been flooding the planet in the last few years, coming from the area within our galaxy that the Earth is now traveling through. They are the real push that is driving all the change that's occurring both in the world and within each of us. But they're actually in the process of doing two very different things. The first is that they are disrupting all old low frequency patterns that have been part of Earth's civilization since very ancient times. We can see these patterns really clearly when we look out at the world at this point. And I think we can all probably agree that what now exists out there does need to be disrupted, and it may need to completely unravel and break down and collapse because so much of it does not resonate with fifth dimensional energy. So many institutions in the world are just too corrupt and driven by third dimensional greed and deceit and aggression. But we can also see the same kind of disruptive dynamic happening on the microcosm level within each of us, right? All dysfunctional patterns within us stemming from ignorance or traumas, negative emotions, misconceptions, misunderstandings, and fear are being flushed to the surface now. They're coming up out of our unconscious in order to be seen and dealt with, integrated within us. And then their low frequency energies released because we can't take these things with us into the fifth dimension. But the important thing to understand is that the other thing that these waves of light are doing is streaming in immense energies of joy and love and peace that we can now tune into more easily than ever before, along with a great sense of freedom and empowerment. And you might be experiencing this at times as well, maybe especially since December 21st, when the solstice and the Great Conjunction occurred. Perhaps at times, for no reason at all, you just feel swept up in great optimism and joy, despite the dark events that have been occurring in the world and the challenging events that may be happening in your personal life. This aspect of these waves of light is here to help us heal very quickly from all the remaining dark stuff that we've been holding within us so that we can release it and keep moving on our path towards fifth dimensional consciousness. So, despite how chaotic and disruptive it can be to feel all the uncomfortable issues arising within us, and also to see everyone else's lives being turned upside down as well, we can actually be very excited about these times. I know I've been waiting for them for so long because they are heralding the liberation of the human race. And you might tune in too to how you have also been waiting, maybe thousands of years, for this period in humanity's history to finally arrive. The times ahead of us for a while longer will likely be rough. But hey, in the end, it will be amazingly exciting and fulfilling to see how humanity has, at long last, shifted into the consciousness of love and harmony and peace and joy and unity. And this is what we're here for, to make that shift in ourselves and then to help guide others through that same process. And truly, this is not all that far ahead of us now, from what I can see and sense. And the more of us who can stay positive and excited about our future, the faster we can bring it forward. Consciousness does create reality. Every day, humanity is creating its future. And lots of exciting spiritual openings are happening for people in many different ways. People are waking up. But I know it is often not enough to just feel this excitement for the future when your current life is not feeling very good. And so I'm making this YouTube for when you're going through a really rough patch in your life, to assist you with handling all the difficult emotions that may be arising within you during these times. Because it can seem really dark at times as we stumble our way through this transitional period in our history. And I want you to know that if you're really struggling emotionally and physically at this time, you're not at all alone. Many light workers in particular seem to be experiencing especially difficult challenges in their lives. Remember, you're kind of at the head of the pack, so to speak, leading the way. So you probably need to make the shift more rapidly than others who will be following behind you. And as an old soul and ascension light worker, you're also likely here to not only resolve and release your own personal karma, like everyone else on the planet, you probably also carry generational karma, and maybe even karma for certain parts of the collective that you volunteered to resolve in this lifetime. Do remember this if you ever start wondering why what you're going through seems so much more difficult than what others around you may be experiencing. So let me address some of the prevalent ascension symptoms that many people have been experiencing during these times, just to remind you that you're not alone in facing the challenges you are. Now, many of us have been dealing with ascension symptoms for quite a while now, but I think never quite like what's been happening lately. In one way, what we're experiencing is simply an intensification of what I've been talking about for a long time, of what I've called the Ascension Void. Now, this is the experience in its early stages in which you begin feeling an overall sense of flatness in your life, where everything you used to feel an interest or a passion in just seems to lose its joy and meaning for you. You feel just kind of blah about your life. And when you're in this phase of ascension, many of the roles you've played in the past seem to just drop away, and your life can become rather small. You're not interested in being much with other people, and you feel more and more vulnerable and confused and lost as to who you are anymore. You begin to question your relationships, and you lose your feeling of safety as your world and your sense of reality kind of begin to disappear. It's really a type of death. It's a death of the ego, or more accurately, a death of ego identification. And it can be really frightening, especially if you don't have a solid spiritual practice to assist you through it. But even having this is not always reliable, because for many, the ascension void can also include periods of deep questioning of long-held, cherished spiritual beliefs and of relationships to spiritual teachers or gurus. And the spiritual practices that you've relied on, sometimes for many years, to bring you clarification, a sense of peace, and a higher knowing of who you are, no longer seem to serve this purpose. In general, you're in a void that feels emptier and emptier of all that's felt familiar and safe to you. So many of us have gone through a sometimes long and gradual process of what I'm describing here, and this has been difficult and confusing and downright arduous at times, especially as life in the world began to be truly challenging last year in general, with the fear and the restrictions of the pandemic permeating our lives on top of everything else. But now that we have entered 2021, it seems that the heat has suddenly been turned up for many. Just about everyone I know, clients and friends alike, and myself included, have been experiencing an intense uptick of profoundly uncomfortable negative emotions and situations to resolve. Old dysfunctional patterns are in our faces. Unresolved traumas from the past are suddenly demanding resolution. And certain old reliable relationships are suddenly disintegrating and falling apart. And because of this, some people have been dealing with ongoing or overwhelming anxiety that sometimes even seems to have no one obvious cause. It's the kind that can just keep you in a constant state of unrest and unsettledness, or it can be an intense fear that suddenly shows up, which can produce a sense of freeze. You're in a state of shock. For a while, you can't think straight or know how to function, even in the most familiar routines in your life. Your brain just kind of goes numb. And it can sometimes feel like nothing is safe anymore. You might barely catch your breath after making it through one challenge, only to find you're having to let go of the next thing that was helping you to feel safe. And you wake up in the morning already feeling anxious, wondering what else can happen to you. Now, what this can sometimes mean is that a karmic relationship or situation in your life has recently ended. Something has just finished. And in your gut, you know it. And you're left in a whole new field of reality without that familiar energetic tie to that person or to that situation that has been in your life for a long time. And there can be a sense of relief with this, but it's also a little bit scary if this relationship or situation has been a major part of your life for a long while. However, the anxiety you're experiencing can also indicate that you have suddenly stepped onto a new timeline in your life. And this is happening a lot to all of us these days. It can feel like you somehow jumped onto like another moving sidewalk in your life, one that's moving faster than the one you've been on. And at first, it feels really unstable and wobbly. Now, this timeline switching can be kind of an interesting experience. If nothing really distressing is happening, it's just kind of an ascension bump into a higher frequency. And you notice that your reality has somehow changed. You're in new territory with maybe new awarenesses about yourself and about your life. New energies are flowing through you. But if the sudden event creating this timeline shift is greatly distressing, like losing your income or your home or an important relationship, or you actually lose someone important through death, it can feel devastating and especially shocking because this new timeline or reality is so different from the one you've been on. You kind of stop and wonder at times, is this really my life now? How did this happen? How did I get here? Where am I? It feels like you've suddenly been thrust into a whole new life with very little warning, and it's very disorienting. Now, at some point, you will realize that this new timeline, this new reality that you've been thrust onto, is actually very exciting, much freer, and much more open to a bright future for you. But initially, because of the loss of what was familiar and safe, it can feel terrifying. And so, along with the natural anxiety and fear that sudden distressing types of events can usually cause, you're also dealing with the sudden timeline switch, which is additionally confusing and destabilizing. So, it can take a while to find your feet under you again, especially since you're likely also dealing with the long lockdown situation that's been going on for almost a year now. Because on top of everything else, you may be also experiencing a sense of isolation and loneliness. You may have come to realize that Zoom sessions and phone calls simply don't cut it anymore. Perhaps you long for face-to-face emotional connection, and your body yearns for touch and the warmth of physical hugs. And I want to say here, if you are feeling over the top, ongoing anxiety and fear about all these things, it may be wise to seek help during these times from outside sources, whether it's from a healer or a doctor or even medication for a while. You really do want to do whatever it takes to take good care of yourself and live with as much calm as possible during these times. But if your anxiety or fear still feels manageable, then I remind you, anxiety and fear are to be expected. You're in the process of rapid ascension. You're being pushed forward into territory you've never been in before. And you're having to let go very quickly of familiar situations and relationships that are not vibrating at the level of consciousness that you've now entered into. And there are ways you can handle these emotions and timeline weirdnesses to keep you as calm and steady as possible. For instance, one way is you can learn how to keep focused on the present moment. If you've ever been able to pop into the present moment during a time of emotional crisis in the past, you've probably realized that this is a space of surprising safety. There's a sense of reprieve, a feeling of pause and clarity and comfort. You're just right there in the moment of what you're doing, focused on whatever immediate task you're involved in. You're not thinking about the future or the past or anything beyond the moment you're in. When you're coming totally into the present moment like this, what has happened is that you have entered into a form of 5D consciousness where there really only is this present moment, and it's where anxiety and fear don't even exist. It's helpful to realize that most anxieties tend to arise out of imagined future events and situations. The danger that might happen in the future, based on your perception of what is currently happening and what has happened in the past, it's just that danger of what might happen. These anxieties also stem from your beliefs that have developed due to a 3D sense of being separate and helpless and alone in the world. And this is a deep sensation that resides in just about every 3D human body. But most of the time, when you pull yourself out of the imagined future scenario and take stock of the actual situation you're currently in, you can see there truly is no actual danger you're facing. You're not being physically endangered, probably. You likely have enough to eat, and you have a roof over your head, and there's nothing you absolutely have to do in that moment to ensure your safety. Of course, there are times when these kinds of situations do exist, but most times this is not true. You really are okay in that moment. It's just your thoughts about the possible dangers in the future that are freaking you out. Therefore, if you can just pull yourself into the present moment and see this, you can realize that perhaps just as you really are okay in this moment, the same will probably be true in future moments as well. And you can remind yourself that you're only in transition now. This is a temporary phase in your ascension process. You just have to keep going for now in any way you can, knowing you're on your way to 5D. And at this point, you're just at the worst part of the journey, and you will get through it. And another thing to remember is that although much of your anxiety and fear may be due to the events and situations in your personal life, some of it may also stem from the very chaotic and disturbing events that are happening out in the world as well, especially if you tune into the news every day. As you may be aware of, and I covered this in the part 1 video on the same subject, there are huge events happening out there, both in the world that we can see and also behind the scenes. And the world does seem to be falling apart. Nothing out there feels any more reliable than what may be happening in your own life. But be aware that, as chaotic as it may feel in the world at this time, it does look like huge events are probably going to be occurring over the next few months that, in the end, will be significant in bringing some really good news and much greater peace to humanity as a whole. But meanwhile, we're not there yet. So the point is that tuning into the news every day at this point may be adding to any anxiety you're already feeling about your own life. And you might want to take a break from it, from time to time at least. In addition, also be aware that as a light worker, you're also likely very empathic. And so you're probably picking up on other people's fear and anxiety. along with your own, and this too just adds to any of your own. So be aware of this. Remember to call in assistance to clear your aura often, especially if you spend time with other people. Call in divine light, angels, guides, ascended masters, whatever works to help protect and calm you. And remember to keep breathing deeply. It's hard to stay anxious if you are taking deep breaths. So, like I say, anxiety and fear seem to be quite prevalent now in people for a number of different reasons. But another symptom that's common during these times I'm finding is depression. Some people who have struggled with depression in the past have now been plunged into that state like never before. And this can, of course, lead to dark despair and even thoughts about suicide. And forced isolation has really increased this tendency. Sometimes a depression can be described as a kind of a state of torpor in which maybe there isn't quite the sense of depression as you've known it in the past, but it's a state of deep energetic fatigue where you experience a heaviness so deep you feel at times you can't even get out of bed in the morning. And it's weird because simultaneously you can also feel a type of restlessness with it, where your brain just won't turn off. It's very, very uncomfortable. But depression can become a serious condition if you begin feeling days and days of it. So, again, if you feel totally debilitated by it, it may be time to seek professional and maybe even pharmaceutical help with it, just for a while. There's no need to feel as if you've failed in any way. If you feel you need to resort to this route, these times are different from others in the past. Sometimes taking medication for a while can really give you a break from struggling with the dark heaviness. Take care of yourself. Do what you need to do to help make yourself functional so you can think straight. But if you're not quite at that point yet, and you've been attempting to push past the depression through distraction or through forced cheerfulness, then I suggest a whole different approach. And that is to fully surrender to the depression. Now, in using the word surrender, I'm not referring to giving up or resigning yourself to the depression. That's very different. Surrender, as I'm using the word, involves a conscious and purposeful choice to just allow what is, whatever it is you're experiencing, to simply be and not resist it or try to change it. And to do this, you need to first make the decision to move out of your mind, where negative thoughts keep cycling around and creating negative emotions, and then to focus instead on your body, where the emotions of your depression are actually centered. If you watch your inner process, you'll find that generally when you're in emotional pain, your automatic tendency is to try to move away from the pain. Of course, this is natural. But the problem is that to do this, you probably go into your mind in hopes of somehow finding a way to escape the pain. But all the mind can do is keep recycling your thoughts about your depression, trying to get you away from it, distract you, or in some other way, try to get you out of it. And as you've likely discovered, this doesn't work very well. The thoughts just keep recycling, and down you go even further into depression. So instead of going into your mind, you need to move your focus down into your body to where the depression and any other difficult emotions reside. And to do this without any judgment about yourself or any resistance to these emotions. You need to just allow your emotional state to be whatever it is and do your best to feel compassion for that part of yourself that's experiencing the depression. As scary as this may initially feel, to move your attention to where all the painful emotions are actually centered, you'll find that it will be, it surprisingly will bring you to a sense of great relief because you'll no longer be resisting these emotions. Once you've shifted your focus to your body, you can then put your hand over the area where your emotions are the most intense. This can feel really good. And you'll find that this is usually, your gut area or your chest, sometimes maybe your throat. And just take in some deep breaths into this area of your body and become aware of the consciousness there inside you that's feeling all the emotions. You can call this, your inner child, your emotional self, or your pain body. It is definitely a younger part of yourself. It's not the adult conscious self that you generally use to engage in life with. It's a part of you that pretty much only knows emotions and bodily sensations. So, as you become aware of this younger consciousness in there, be careful to not get caught into identifying with it or merging with it. Stay present as your adult self, or at least as someone who's maybe kind of like an older brother or sister, and just be with that little one with great compassion and understanding. No judgment, no pushing to convince that one in pain that he or she shouldn't be feeling the emotions, or finding a way out of them. No shaming, no guilting. You just be with them, letting them know that they're not alone. You understand them. And it's okay that they're feeling what they are. You don't have to have any answer to the problem of what they're feeling. You don't have to give them any spiritual guidance. Just be with that one in pain so that he or she doesn't feel alone. Just doing this, joining with them, with compassion, can bring you a great deal of relief and comfort. And tears may come up in the process. And if so, just let them flow. Let them wash the pain out of the body. But keep your focus on being with this little one. Don't merge with them. And don't identify with what they're feeling. You're just with this little one that's crying. You can also, of course, in the process, call in divine light and angels, your higher self, any other spiritual guidance that feels helpful. And you could also have conversations with this younger self. First listen to see if it's wanting to say something to you, and listen closely. And if you can find loving, compassionate words of wisdom to respond to it, great. But if you can't, you can just keep listening. And you might just keep repeating, I love you with every breath, and just continue to listen and be there. Because in doing this, at some point, you will feel a greater stillness come over you, a relaxing. And then you might wish to bring this little one up into your sacred heart, where both of you can feel bathed in divine love and compassion, and maybe even feel the violet flame that's in your heart. And eventually you might visualize releasing the emotions of pain and depression into the light, whatever visualization comes to you. This process can be done more easily with a partner or a friend that's, holding space for you, keeping you on track. But you can also do it alone if you call in help from your higher self and other divine beings to be with you. It's mainly a matter of just shifting your focus out of your head and into your body, and to be fully with the emotions with compassion rather than resisting the emotions and judging them. Emotions in general just want to be allowed and experienced without any judgment or resistance. That is the key. And of course, the important thing I'm pointing to here also is how necessary it is to remember to always, always have compassion for yourself, no matter what's happening, what you're feeling, or what you've done or what you've said. The issues creating your depression or anxiety or any negative emotion may be profoundly painful ones that have likely been stored in your unconscious for many years because they were too difficult to fully experience when they first happened. But know that if they are now arising, you can handle them, you can resolve them. As I say, the powerful fifth dimensional energies available to us at this point are here to help you do this much more easily and much more quickly than ever before in the past. At the same time, I do have to say that this could be really difficult to do when it comes to releasing pain about important relationships that may be faltering or disappearing at this point. If this is happening for you in certain relationships, what you may be finally seeing in them are dysfunctional patterns that you haven't ever recognized or dealt with before. You may become aware that there's a need to either change these patterns or perhaps even that it's time for these relationships to come to an end. Even long-term marriages are suddenly becoming intolerable to one or both spouses, and they're breaking up. And family members are breaking off communication with each other. Unfortunately, and rather strangely, I think, much of the dissension between spouses, family members, and friends at this time is occurring around what happened in the US election. But you may realize that it also may have started earlier around the pandemic lockdown situation and people's beliefs about the virus. It's really kind of strange when you think about it. I mean, you've maybe been able to bypass all kinds of issues with these people in the past, but these are now issues you maybe somehow can't get past. People are just finding themselves polarized in stuck positions like never before around these two current issues. Even people who have never before been particularly political. It's just been somehow very easy to get caught in this polarization. And it's painful because polarization carries a very low vibration. We're being shown very clearly the tendency we have all had in third dimensional reality to divide and argue and judge others, and how essential it is to move past this tendency into a higher consciousness. So if you find yourself falling into this kind of polarization, no matter how right and more informed you may feel yourself to be, see if you can step out of that fixated position of your opinion so you can experience greater compassion, understanding, and harmony with those around you. Try to get above the issues and see both sides to the arguments. And try to find other common ground in any way you can. However, if in doing this, if you're really doing your best to be non-judgmental and compassionate, and yet nothing seems to change in the relationship, it may be that the two of you are no longer vibrating at the same frequency, and it is time to go your own separate ways. And this can be so hard, but if a relationship really does seem like it's breaking off, and especially if the other person has made it clear that they're wanting to separate from you, it may be wise to just let them go, at least for now. One thing that may be happening, and it's not true in all cases, but one thing that may be happening with certain family members or old friends is that they are actually headed on a very different timeline than you are. As you may have realized at this point, people are really separating into two different groups now. not everyone will be able to make the leap into the much higher consciousness of the fifth dimension. Many souls are simply not ready. They're not able to make this transition in this lifetime. So there's a real bifurcation taking place between two groups of people at this time. The first group is now streaming out of third dimensional consciousness, heading into the higher fourth dimension, on their way to the fifth dimension. Some of these people are aware of it, whether they use the dimensional paradigm or not. They just know they're on their way into a world of much higher consciousness. Many others within this group are not yet aware of any of this, but they're sufficiently awake and heart-centered at this point to be able to probably eventually make the shift. And they will be following later, once greater awakening occurs for them. But the second group consists of those souls who are not yet ready to make such a leap in consciousness. They need more time in the third and fourth dimensions for their evolution. And they're now shifting into the lower levels of the fourth dimension, where life for them will continue for a while going in the same kind of dire direction it's currently going in. But at this point, we're all still kind of here together in this third and fourth dimensional reality. That's in complete chaos and breakdown. And it can be very challenging to be with family members and old friends who look like they're taking the other timeline. And time will tell. But do remember, if indeed these are people with whom you've always had a strong, loving bond, you will stay connected to them on the soul and the heart level, whatever happens. True love between souls never dies. And at some point in the future, you may well reunite with them. So I've been describing a lot that's happening for people on the emotional level. But many are also experiencing an intensification of mental and physical issues too. You may be experiencing such things as a whole lot of exhaustion, or maybe strange sleep patterns, or strange pains in the body, or disturbing memory loss. Maybe you just have spurts of feeling discombobulated, really disoriented in some way. And all these kinds of things are due to the fact that your body and brain are trying to catch up with your consciousness. Your DNA is being activated in new ways. New strands are coming online. And your brain is being rewired to accommodate, this greater awakening of consciousness that's occurring within you. So if you're experiencing any of what I've been describing here, I again emphasize you are not alone. Many, many light workers, in particular, are going through these intense kinds of changes. And it can be easy to forget why all of this is happening, that you're in the process of very rapid ascension, a leap into a much higher consciousness and reality. You're not going crazy, and you're not falling backward in your awakening process. You are rapidly awakening and letting go of what is no longer working for you. None of these low frequency patterns and emotions you've picked up on your long sojourn through the third dimension can go with you into the fifth dimension. It all has to come to your attention so you can see it clearly, acknowledge it with compassion for yourself without any self-judgment, and then allow it to release into the light. However, I know, as I say, this can be extremely challenging, especially as we're now entering perhaps the darkest times during this transitional period in which the earth and all of humanity begins to make the monumental leap into the fifth dimension. So there is one thing you can focus on during these times that will greatly help you to make it through. And that is knowing that in the end, all you can do is rely on trust in the divine, however you may define this. At times, trust is the only real option for staying sane. And this is what you can come to in the end when all else has failed. If you find yourself in the darkest part of your journey, you probably realize that you have tried to understand in your rational mind what is happening to you. You've tried to rely on past familiar ways of dealing with events and situations in your life that have always pretty much worked for you, healing processes that used to work really well, talking it out with your friends, meditation, other spiritual practices. And you've realized that nothing is working really well anymore. Your past comforting beliefs are no longer there for you. You don't know if what you decide to do is right anymore. You don't trust your own judgment, and other people's advice is no longer helpful. You feel as if you're on your own in a strange land, and it can get terrifying. So, if you ever find yourself in this state, remember you have a very important decision that you can make. And you basically have two choices. And the first option is to allow yourself to just fall into despair and begin wallowing in self pity, and maybe even spend an entire day crying on and off. Now, there's nothing wrong with crying, and I want to be clear about this. In fact, shedding tears can be a powerful way to move negative energy out of your body and release bottled up stress. It's a very similar process as when you find yourself on a laughing jag. Both processes serve to move energy through and out of you. However, if you watch carefully once you start crying, you'll find there's a point when you kind of come to a type of energetic stopping point that occurs. And there's a sense of relief and greater calm. And if you're smart, this is the time you'll stop crying. Because if you start it up again, thinking you'll find even more relief and calm by crying some more, you're likely going to find yourself disappointed and also totally exhausted in the end. And this is because you have once again drawn the grief back into yourself and have begun recycling it through both your emotional and your physical bodies, giving rise to even more self-pity. This is what will totally exhaust you and not really give you relief in the end. The purpose of crying is to release the grief and pain, to let it go. Now, you may have several different times during the day when a new burst of crying starts happening. And this may be just that another deeper level of grief is arising. And so it's helpful to cry that energy out of this new level in the same kind of way. Again, watching for the energetic shift, when it's complete, and then stopping before you fall back into self-pity again. At any rate, what I'm saying here is that one option you have when your life seems to be falling apart is to make the passive choice of allowing yourself to fall into total despair and self-pity and ongoing crying and render yourself totally impotent to do anything about it. But there is another choice you can make. And this could start out with a conscious crying jag, as I've described above. But then, once you've released energy in this way, if you're smart, you can choose a second option. And that's the one of trust. Trusting in the divine, knowing that it's going to keep you safe and taken care of in one way or another. Trusting that you will somehow be spiritually guided in the right direction in the most benevolent way for your highest good, to get you into the fifth dimension. When you make this choice, you can simply, it's like taking a plunge into this trust. And in doing this, you can discover this luscious sense of just total let go into the unknown. And the sensation of being lovingly caught in the arms of the beloved. In doing this, you realize you've never really been alone. You've never been truly isolated or left to manage things on your own. Your true, magnificent self, the soul that you are, has always been there, lovingly guiding you throughout your entire life. This greater aspect of who you are has just been waiting patiently for you to realize this and to give up your struggle of thinking you're all on your own here, having to figure things out in this rather cold and inhospitable world of the third dimension. You have been tenderly loved and guided throughout your life as you've lived through one experience after another in your evolutionary process of learning and in remembering who you really are. But because of dark energies present in the third dimension, you've been cut off from fully knowing this, cut off from experiencing your natural, ongoing, profound connection to Source. And another thing to remember is that in the process of fully trusting the divine, you naturally enter into 5D consciousness. And you discover that whatever you need really does always come to you in perfect timing, in the perfect way. If you can stay in this consciousness, there's really no stress or impatience or fear. If a choice or decision needs to be made, it's clear what it is, and you make it. You feel held in a divine safety net of comfort. And you also discover something very important, that your only true security ever comes from Source. It doesn't originate from anything outside of you. Outer security, in the end, is only an illusion. And often, for you to finally discover this, all outer supports you mistakenly thought were keeping you safe may disappear, at least for a while, just so you can see this. You can probably remember times when something has happened, and it lets you realize that you aren't going to get what it is that you want or what you feel you need or in the time you think you really need it. And it can sometimes feel disastrous when this doesn't happen. You can also feel like you failed in some way to manifest it and just fall into depression about it. But think about it. How many times has this happened in the past, only to find out later that it's actually so much better that you didn't get what you hoped to at that time, because now something so much better has been able to happen due to not getting that thing when you thought you wanted it? How many times have you realized that something much better had somehow been planned for you all along? And if that other thing had happened, this new thing couldn't have. It's important to understand that so many things that occur in our lives happen for a reason, just like this. And sometimes it may not be that something else better is planned, but it's that there's an important learning or experience that is needed for you on your ascension path to wake you up to something important. And it might be something that will greatly assist you in the future, either in your personal life or in doing your spiritual mission. But it's something important that you had to experience. So, learning to trust is extremely important now, more than ever before. There's a wonderful analogy about this process of trust that's been given to us by indigenous tribes in the world who have had prophecies about these transitional times for many generations. And you've probably heard it or read it before, but it bears repetition because it is so apt and helpful now that these times are truly upon us. And what these prophecies have warned us is that during these transitional times, we need to see ourselves in life as if we're swimming down a river that at some point in the future flows out into the sea. This is our life. And in the past, we've always pretty much stayed close to the shores along the river and in the shallow water along the shores. And we've come ashore at familiar places, places that look good. We've camped out and stayed for a while, feeling safe and comfortable there on the shores. And we've had a lot of time, a lot of fun at times. And then we kind of move on, go to the next places, had new experiences. But now, during these times of transition, this is not what is best for us to do because these shores are quickly eroding. These familiar places are no longer safe. Everything is falling apart and collapsing. And so, what we now need to do is let go of these familiar shores and instead swim out to the middle of the river where the current is extremely strong. And it may be frightening to do this, to let go the familiar shallow places in the river near the shores and simply give ourselves to the river. But this is what we must do. Just allow the current to take us, because this is how we are going to be taken at long last to the sea, to the golden age, the age of Aquarius, to the fifth dimension. So, dear ones, I leave you with this story. Remember to be kind and compassionate with yourself. Learn to love yourself unconditionally. Know that you're on your way now. The quantum leap has finally begun. And at some point, you will find yourself. And you will realize you've landed in the fifth dimension. I send you my love and many, many blessings as we pass through this final period of the transitional times.